weeks ago, the Secretary of Air Force promoted me to Colonel in the Air Force. The West LA VA is in the district. It is the third largest VA in the United States. And for many years, it was somewhat, actually it was quite dysfunctional. A new Secretary of VA came in, Bob McDonald. He worked with plaintiffs who sued the VA because it was so dysfunctional. They settled that suit last year. A master plan was put in that's going to now have, at its full build out, over 1,200 units for veterans who are homeless at all different levels. It's going to increase the delivery of medical services to the veterans. It's going to be a, they call the crown jewel of the VA calendar. They want this to work out and they have other VAs monitor it. For that to happen, they need legislation to pass. And I've introduced a bill along with Senator Feinstein. It's the same language in both houses. And my bill earlier this year cleared the Republican-controlled Veterans Committee. So pretty excited about that. We're waiting for that to hopefully get on the House floor. Last year, I was the only freshman Democrat to get any bills passed into law. I got 3 of them. 2 of them dealt with veterans, one of which I worked with Senator Feinstein, and we got hundreds of millions of dollars to VAs across the nation to retrofit them for seismic upgrades. West LA VA got over $35 million of that pot of money. It worked so well that we're doing it again this year, and hopefully we can get this bill through as well. And I think it's important to not just care for veterans for a moral reason, but also because we have, as you know, an all-volunteer armed forces. And if the people who are volunteering for our military see that we don't treat our veterans well, it's going to be something that they notice, and less people are going to volunteer for our military. So there's a whole host of reasons to help our veterans. There is a veterans homelessness issue, and if any of you know anyone that's a veteran that is homeless or about to become homeless, have them contact my office or me. Janet in my office is back there. She does great work. And there are federal programs that will help veterans. It's called a HUD-VASH voucher. The HUD part of it provides money so veterans can get housing. The VASH part of it provides services, so these veterans can transition into hopefully something that they can do in society instead of having no services being delivered to them. So there are these vouchers that are still available, and we're just looking for people who want to use them, and then we can get them help. So the second issue I want to talk about is criminal justice reform, and specifically about bail. And I know it's something I never thought about, and it'd be a little bizarre to me if you thought about that a lot, because people don't walk around America, right, thinking about, oh, let's think about bail. But it is a huge problem in our criminal justice system. Every year, there's about 450,000 people who are in our jails and prisons, and they are incarcerated, not because they've been convicted of any crime, but because they cannot post bail. And that, to me, turns presumption of innocence on its head. It is also grossly unfair. It criminalizes the poor. Studies also show that people who are unable to pay post bail are also exactly those folks who can least afford being in a place for weeks on end, because then they don't know how to take care of their children. If they're in school, they start losing their classes, or they'll lose a low-income job that they have. And it's just this cascade of effects. And these studies then show that what ends up happening is a much higher proportion of these folks actually will plead guilty, not because they believe they're guilty, but because they just need to get out of jail or prison. So this was brought to my attention by one of my constituents, Dorothy, right, who is sitting back there. And we looked into it. We saw how profoundly unfair this was, in addition to costing taxpayers money, because you're now paying for 450,000 people who sit in jails and prisons, even though they haven't been convicted of a single crime. We now have introduced a bill that does 2 things. First, it tells the federal system, you can't do this anymore. And then it tells states that you've got to transition to a different system within 3 years, while we cut off Department of Justice grants to your state. There are other jurisdictions that have reformed the bail system, and not only does it save money, it also is safer. The state of Kentucky went to a risk assessment system, which basically says, look, if you're dangerous, we don't care how much money you can post. we are not letting you go. If you're not dangerous, we let you go, and then we expect you to come back. After they implement that system, they actually have less crimes that occur from people who leave and then come back for the hearing. The District of Columbia has a similar system. Again, they use a risk assessment, and they basically say, look, if you're enormously wealthy, but you're a dangerous society, we're not letting you out. And if you're not a dangerous society, you get to go. And then 85–90% will come back for the hearing, which is comparable to what happens in most cases. And if you think about it, there is no relationship, right, between cash on hand and how dangerous you are. And we have this strange system, right, where we're skewing it so that we make this determination based on your risk society, depending on how much money you can post, which really is quite bizarre, and it's actually not very safe. Only the Philippines and the US have a massive private bail system. Many civilized countries ban it because they view injecting money into issues of freedom and incarceration is morally wrong. And it's my hope we can reform this system. There is movement on criminal justice reform in Congress. As some of you may know, politics is like a circle, right? Sometimes you're so right, you're left, and vice versa. So there are these interesting issues, such as privacy, where last year we reined back our intelligence agencies because I believe they were violating your constitutional rights. And that was led by a coalition of very liberal Democrats and very conservative Republicans. On criminal justice reform, you now have the NAACP and you have the Koch brothers supporting this. They sort of come in from different angles. You have Republicans who now support criminal justice reform. Some of those who are fiscally conservative think it's a huge waste of money to incarcerate all of these folks in America. Some of them who are libertarian think that for a certain number of crimes, it's just wrong to incarcerate people, such as a large number of drug crimes. And so there is now movement. I think it's something that maybe we can get done this year, but I'm very hopeful we can get done at least in the next 2 or 3 years. And I'm fighting to get bail to be part of this system, and we're getting, of this reform, and we're getting additional co-sponsors every day. And it's also just educating people about it. And hopefully now you know a little bit about bail, and we can get more and more people thinking about this issue. If you want to learn more, the New York Times did this really fabulous article last year talking about the bail trap, and they walked through stories of people who are incarcerated, can't post bail, and then their lives get ruined. There's also some jurisdictions where they make you pay a fee just to get out of jail, and you don't get that back, whether or not you come back to the hearing. So it's not even a payment to try to get you back. It's simply a source of revenue for a lot of these jurisdictions. The state of Missouri, a lot of their cities actually do this. I don't see how that's constitutional, right? Because you're essentially assessing money on people who have not been convicted of a single thing. There's lawsuits now on that system, and hopefully will prevail. So there are some huge problems with bail, and it's something that I'm trying to raise the issue on. And anything you can do on that, please let me know, and happy work for you to get the word out. And then the last issue I'll talk about today, before I answer questions, is gun safety legislation. I had a lot of fun doing the sit-in. And as you know, the speaker cut off the cameras, which I think generated more press because we ended up doing social media, right? Facebook, Periscope, and Twitter. And then C-SPAN started broadcasting to social media. And it turned out to be quite cool. I had the chance to speak. If you want to see my speech, it's on our social media. It's on Facebook. We posted it on Facebook. It was a little over 25 hours. Your speech? No. You know, because there's a large number of Democrats, we sort of took shifts occupying the House floor. And so people would sort of come in, do the sit-in, and then a group would leave, and another group would come in. So the senators were quite nice. Many of them came over to show support. They gave us a lot of food, which is really nice. Some of them from sort of their jurisdiction. So Maisie from Hawaii gave us, macadamia nuts coated with chocolate. That was very good. Elizabeth Warren gave us Dunkin' Donuts. And so we had, we're very well fed in that sense. Not healthy food, but we were well fed. We also had the amazing opportunity to see John Lewis speak in sort of a civil rights type speech. I'd never seen that before live, and it's quite remarkable to be with a living legend, to watch him do his thing, and it was just an honor for me to be a part of that entire process. We were pushing, and still are pushing, 3 common sense gun safety measures. First is universal background checks. Second is to close what's known as a 3-day loophole on universal background checks. So it turns out that if you look at what happened in the Charleston shooting, they did put in for a background check. The Department of Justice didn't get back in time to basically say no, and they let the person have a gun. Had this loophole been closed, that person would not have been able to get a gun. Basically, if the Department of Justice, for whatever reason, cannot get back within that amount of time, you just have to wait a little longer for the DOJ to get back to say yes or no. And then the third measure we're pushing is, if you are deemed to be so dangerous that you can't fly, you really shouldn't go buy an assault rifle. So these are pretty common sense measures. And you're seeing some movement. So in the past, so for example, last year, similar legislation was introduced, and not a single Republican put their name on it. This year, you have, I think, at least 8 Republican senators that signed on to this legislation, or forms of it. And then in the House of Representatives, you've had now multiple Republican members of Congress also sign on to similar legislation. So that's exciting, right? So now you're seeing some movement. And my view is, it may or may not happen this year, but after November, we are going to have a change in the Senate. I believe there's a very high chance that Democrats take control of the Senate. And in the House, everyone, and even Republicans, will admit they are going to lose seats. The only question is how many seats they lose. With Donald Trump on the ticket, we really don't know. It could be a blowout for Democrats. And all of you remember, right, what happened with California with Governor Pete Wilson. So California used to be a purple state. We elected Ronald Reagan. Republican Casper Weinberger represented San Francisco. And then Pete Wilson does this Proposition 187, very hateful, angry proposition. It turned California blue rather quickly. You had a large number of minority voters register and then vote, and they still keep on voting. If that happens in America, and you now, I think, have a chance of that happening on a national basis, where you have minorities across America registering to vote and then voting because they're either scared of having a racist elected, or they're angry, you could have a Democratic wave. And I remember talking to this minority voter last month, and she said, I'm voting because it's now an existential threat to me if Donald Trump gets elected. And that's helpful to Democrats. So we'll see what happens in November, but things look good for the Democratic caucus in the House of Representatives. We had President Obama come a few months ago to raise funds for House members, Democrats, because the White House has now realized, hey, with Donald Trump at the top ticket, Republicans, anything is possible. And you now have districts that probably would not have flipped, now very much in play. About 15 additional districts were announced last month. We call them red or blue districts, where it's currently being held by a Republican that could flip to become Democratic. So it's an exciting time, and we'll see what happens in November. But I can guarantee you we're going to win more seats in the House. It's just how many, and I'm pretty confident the U.S. Senate's going to flip. And so with that, happy to answer any questions you may have, and thanks again for having me here.